The recent escalation of violence in the West Bank, amidst an already volatile situation between Israel and Hamas, reflects the deep-rooted and complex dynamics at play in this long-standing conflict. Understanding the current military operations, political motivations, and the socio-cultural backdrop is critical in grasping the full scope of the issue. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, have launched what is being described as one of the most extensive operations in decades in the West Bank. At the same time, Palestinian insurgents have fought back, igniting a fresh wave of hostilities in a region already beleaguered by decades of tension, occupation, and warfare. To fully understand the situation, it is necessary to go back to the historical roots of the West Bank. This region has been under Israeli occupation since the 1967 Six-Day War, and its status has been the source of much international debate and negotiation ever since. The West Bank is home to around 3 million Palestinians who live under varying degrees of Israeli military control, while some 500,000 Israeli settlers live in Jewish settlements scattered across the territory. The settlements, which have expanded significantly over the years, are seen by much of the international community as illegal under international law, though Israel disputes this. The West Bank is also considered a hotbed of Palestinian resistance, with many Palestinians viewing their actions against Israeli military forces and settlers as part of a broader struggle for self-determination. On the other hand, Israel has frequently justified its military presence and operations as necessary for its national security, often citing threats from insurgent and militant groups operating in the region. The Israeli operation launched on August 28, 2024, is a continuation of Israel's broader military objectives, which include neutralizing perceived terrorist threats within the region. According to the Israeli government, this operation is aimed at dismantling armed groups operating in key cities within the West Bank, including Jenin, Tubas, and Nablus. Israel has long claimed that these areas are home to militants and insurgents who pose a direct threat to Israeli civilians, both within the West Bank and inside Israel itself. The military operation appears to be a preemptive strike, meant to weaken the capabilities of these armed groups before they can carry out further attacks. The IDF has conducted airstrikes, ground incursions, and drone surveillance in densely populated areas, including refugee camps. These tactics, while effective from a military standpoint, often lead to civilian casualties and significant destruction of infrastructure, which only deepens the resentment and hostility among the local Palestinian population. This military strategy, commonly referred to as mowing the grass, involves conducting periodic military operations to weaken militant groups without seeking a permanent resolution. Critics of this approach argue that it leads to endless cycles of violence without addressing the root causes of the conflict, namely the occupation itself and the lack of a viable political solution for the Palestinians. On the other side, Palestinian militant groups, including Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and factions within Fatah, have responded with force. These groups have claimed responsibility for various attacks on Israeli military vehicles and have vowed to continue their resistance against the Israeli occupation. For many Palestinians, the IDF's operations are viewed as part of a broader strategy by Israel to solidify its control over the West Bank and undermine any prospects for Palestinian statehood. The West Bank, while distinct from Gaza, has seen increasing levels of violence and militancy in recent years. Cities like Jenin have long been hubs of resistance, with deep historical and symbolic significance for the Palestinian struggle. During the Second Intifada in the early 2000s, Jenin was the site of intense battles between Israeli forces and Palestinian fighters, and it continues to be a focal point for both sides in the current conflict. From the Palestinian perspective, the ongoing Israeli military operations are not merely about security, but are seen as part of a broader campaign of occupation and oppression. The continued expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, combined with what many Palestinians view as discriminatory practices by Israeli forces and settlers, fuels a sense of injustice and desperation. One of the key drivers of tension in the West Bank is the presence of Israeli settlers. These settlers, often driven by religious and ideological convictions, have established communities in what Palestinians consider to be their future state. The settlements are heavily fortified and protected by the Israeli military, and in many cases, settlers have formed militias to defend their homes. In recent years, there has been a marked increase in settler violence against Palestinians. According to the United Nations, there have been over 1,300 settler attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank since October 2023. These attacks range from vandalism and arson to physical assaults and shootings, often resulting in Palestinian casualties. In many cases, settlers who commit acts of violence face little to no consequences, further exacerbating tensions between the two communities. For many Palestinians, the presence of settlers represents a direct threat to their livelihoods and their aspirations for statehood. The Israeli government's support for settlement expansion, combined with the lack of accountability for settler violence, has led to widespread disillusionment among Palestinians, particularly in the younger generation, who see little hope for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. The current escalation in the West Bank cannot be viewed in isolation from the broader geopolitical context. The Israel-Hamas war, which has largely centered on the Gaza Strip, has already drawn international attention and concern, with many countries calling for an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian relief. However, the West Bank has often been overshadowed by the more dramatic and devastating scenes coming out of Gaza. Despite this, the West Bank remains a critical flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As Israel continues its operations in Gaza, there is a real possibility that the violence in the West Bank could spiral out of control, leading to a broader regional conflict. The involvement of other regional actors, such as Iran, which Israel claims is funneling weapons into the West Bank, adds another layer of complexity to the situation. International reactions to the Israeli operations in the West Bank have been mixed. While some governments, particularly Israel's allies in the West, have expressed support for Israel's right to defend itself, others have criticized the heavy-handed tactics and the impact on Palestinian civilians. The lack of a clear political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict only deepens the sense of frustration on both sides and contributes to the cycle of violence. One of the most troubling aspects of the ongoing violence in the West Bank is the toll it is taking on civilians. While the IDF targets militants, the reality of urban warfare means that civilians are often caught in the crossfire. The use of airstrikes, drones, and ground incursions in densely populated areas increases the risk of civilian casualties, and the destruction of infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, and homes, exacerbates the humanitarian crisis. Palestinians in the West Bank already face significant challenges in accessing basic services, and the recent military operations have only made the situation worse. The IDF's blockade of Jenin's central hospital, combined with the shutdown of internet and cellular services in some areas, has further isolated the local population. Reports of water and sewage services being cut off in certain areas only add to the suffering of civilians. For many Palestinians, the sense of isolation and abandonment is palpable. The international community has largely focused its attention on Gaza, and the West Bank's plight has been overshadowed. This sense of neglect only deepens the frustration and anger among Palestinians, many of whom feel that their lives and struggles are being ignored by the rest of the world. As the situation in the West Bank continues to unfold, the question remains, is there a path forward? The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has defied easy solutions for decades, and the current violence is yet another reminder of how deeply entrenched the issues are. While military operations may temporarily weaken militant groups, they do little to address the underlying grievances that drive the conflict. For many Palestinians, the occupation is the root cause of the violence. Until there is a viable political solution that addresses their aspirations for statehood and self-determination, the cycle of violence is likely to continue. On the Israeli side, there is a deep-seated fear of terrorism and insecurity, particularly in light of the recent attacks from Gaza and the ongoing threats from groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. The international community has a role to play in mediating a solution, but finding common ground between the two sides is incredibly challenging. The peace process, which once seemed like a potential solution, has largely stalled, and there is little appetite for negotiations on either side. In the absence of a political solution, the risk of further violence and instability remains high. In conclusion, the current Israeli military operations in the West Bank are part of a broader and deeply complex conflict that shows no signs of resolution. The violence has deep historical roots, and both sides have deeply held grievances that are unlikely to be addressed through military means alone. The situation in the West Bank, like the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict, will require not just military action, but a renewed commitment to finding a long-term political solution that addresses the aspirations and fears of both Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you for taking the time to explore this important topic with me. If you found this discussion insightful, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and share it with others who might find it interesting. Your support helps keep the conversation going, and I look forward to bringing you more in-depth analysis on issues that matter. Stay tuned and see you next time.